Hello, everyone. It's the Historical Gamer. You can call me Matt, and I'm here today with Jean, the Strategy Wargamer, for episode 3 of the Single Malt Strategy podcast. Today, I think the main topic we're looking at is probably modern conflicts in gaming, although we'll see. We tend to be a little bit freeform in the way that things roll out. But, to get things started, how are you doing today, Jean?
Not bad, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. What have you been up to? What have you been playing lately?
Well, I've been on the go a lot lately because between school and fire department and stuff like that, I've been on my iPhone and iPad. So I've been trying to find a game that I can get myself into. And lately, I've been playing Commander of the Great War a lot.
Okay. For those of our listeners who may not be aware, what's a little bit about that game?
So, Commander of the Great War is a Matrix, Slytherin production, also by Matrix Games, and it's a World War One type game, and it's how do I say it's all of Europe, North Africa, and middle parts of the Middle East, and basically you choose. It's a two-player game. One side picks the Allies, other side's Axis, and it's top down. It's a pretty cool game. Basically, the whole goal of the game is to either win for your side or for the other side. There's a production side where you can pick units, research, which is pretty in depth. The only thing that the game is lacking is a diplomacy system, because the only thing you can do in the game is declare a war against somebody else. You can't make peace or set up armistice or anything like that. So it's like once you're at war with somebody, it's just all out until the other nation crumbles. And I did pretty good. I just took down Russia, so I'm now redeploying all my forces to the Western Front to take out Italy and France and England.
Okay, so you're playing as the Central Powers then?
Yeah, Austria. I got Austria in the war, Germany's in the war, and Turkey.
Cool. Yeah, I played a 30 episode Let's Play or whatever, if you will, on my channel, and played as Germany. I won the war, but it took until I think early 1918 to actually break the Allies. Fortunately, I didn't attack the convoys, so I didn't draw the Americans in, and that I think was key to me winning as opposed to losing the way that the Central Powers historically did. So you've been playing that on your iPad then? You said you've been on the go a lot.
Yeah, I've been on my iPad a lot, and my phone. I just got the new phone. I was hoping that it's got the 7 Plus. I used to have the 6, the smaller screen, and I got the 7 Plus, hoping that I could get the game on the 7 Plus. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like the game is. It looks like it's only available on the large iPad screen. So I was kind of hoping that they might have included it for the 7 Plus or for the larger iPhones.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed with Matrix and Slytherin for their mobile games, for their kind of strategy games that they put out on iOS, is that it seems like they exclusively go out on iPad, and they're not set up to be able to be viewed on iPhones, which is interesting considering that the phone screens are getting so much bigger these days. But I can certainly understand it from a controlling the experience perspective.
Because you have to change the UI a little bit, I think, when you do it on the iPhone.
UI, yeah, scaling is also a big thing. I mean, you don't want to have a crappy user experience because everything's compressed and you can't really experience the game. I think that's another piece of it. But yeah, so that's mainly what you've been playing. You've been on the go, so mostly iPad stuff, nothing on your computer or anything like that?
No, this is the I've been trying to deal with this for the last month, primarily because I'm in the middle of doing a lot of training, and I go straight from school to like the firehouse and back home, go to sleep, and then do the whole thing again the next day. So I have an iMac, so I have a full desktop. Obviously, I'm not carrying that around with me. So I have my iPad and my iPhone, and I would love a lot of times when I have like a break at school, or if when I have a break at the firehouse, to just be able to play desktop games. And I've been thinking about selling my iMac, getting a MacBook Pro, so this way I can launch Windows or play games on my Mac side. But there was an interesting thing I found on the internet. There's a thing called a Kangaroo PC. and it's $99. It runs Windows. It runs full Windows 10 natively. x86 types applications, and I was thinking of having the iPad, and then whenever I want to play these games, I can start this Kangaroo, and it's very small. It's about the size of like a smartphone. You just have to connect it to your iPad, and you launch an app. And basically starts Windows. I can have like maybe old school strategy games like maybe Liberty or Death, or maybe Hearts of Iron, the first or second one on there.
Okay.
I was thinking of doing that maybe to solve it, but I don't know. I'm floating some ideas around.
Trying to think if that Kangaroo PC is some kind of bootleg thing that you find in like a back alley when you're in China or something like that.
No, there's some good reviews on it online. I did a lot of research on it. It just doesn't have the horsepower on it. Geekbench wise is I think like 2,400, so it's a little bit less powerful than iPhone 6. It's the equivalent of probably like if you had to put it on a laptop, probably a laptop from like 2003 in terms of an Intel processor.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm gonna ask for myself. I haven't been playing a ton of strategy games lately. I've been sick the last week, so hopefully, if there's any of that coming through the audio, it's not too distorted. But yeah, I've been sick the last week or so. I played a little bit of Cossacks. I posted that on my channel, and played a little bit of Verdun. I don't know if you're familiar with Verdun, but it's a World War I first-person shooter. And
I was meaning, yeah, that's how was that? I've been thinking about getting that.
It was fun. So I played it back a long, long time ago, maybe like 2-3 years ago. It was like a free beta. I think it's kind of like an indie studio that makes it. And then it started being paid, and then it was on Steam. It was one of the first greenlit games, if I can recall correctly. And I played it a bit, did a few videos on it, and then I haven't touched it in a while. And I noticed, hey, wait a minute, it came out on the PlayStation 4, which I have one of. So
really?
yeah, so it came out on the PlayStation 4, and I figured, I already own the game, but what the heck? Why not see what it's like on console? It's only like $12. It's on sale. It came out. So I went ahead and picked it up. I may need to adjust my sensitivity because things like the controls feel a little bit sluggish. But other than that, I think they did a pretty good job. There's not a huge user base on the PS4 right now, which is understandable. It's a game that's been out for a few years, and it's an indie game, so it's not it's not in stores. It's only in the digital marketplace, and I think a lot of console gamers still get their games in stores as opposed to buying online. So it's one of those things where I think it's well done. I hope it works out for them because, again, I like to see these kind of small studios that are pushing games that we don't see a ton of. There's very few World War I FPSs out there, and I know Battlefield is approaching it, but certainly not in a realistic manner where it looks like some of the screenshots you're like some kind of armored suit knight, like with a futuristic gun that's not really World War I. Verdun is very authentic, as far as a first-person shooter can be. So I think it's encouraging to see that. I wish them all the success in the world. I don't know how successful it will be unless it ends up being one of those games that like Sony gives away as part of your membership for being like an online member there. I think that would be a really good opportunity for them if they do it. But if not, still happy to see it and hope it goes over well.
Is it single player or is it multiplayer?
It's really exclusively multiplayer. They don't have a campaign or anything like that. They do have a wave survival mode in it, where you can kind of play against AI bots that are coming at you in ever increasing numbers, almost like zombies, as far as Call of Duty is concerned. But given that we are the Single Malt Strategy podcast, I think I may defer from talking too much about an FPS, although it certainly fits the sort of historical and war game genre, because it's pretty authentic. Like, you shoot your bolt action rifle off, you got to wait to load the stripper clip. It's not rapid. It feels about right. And having handled and fired some of those weapons, it does feel right.
It would be really cool if what they did is, I had this idea a couple of years back, and some games might be actually doing it, but I had this idea where you can combine first-person shooter with strategy in terms of like, you would have like, let's say a first-person squad, right, made of players, and you have another squad, they comprise a company. Now, players would take the roles of like the soldiers as well as the officers. Once you hit like company size or like battalion size, you would set up orders for your squads and your companies to attack like this village, and you would have like a map on a table.
There was an old game from it's still around, but it originally came out in like 2002, 2003, somewhere around there, called Battlefield Europe or World War II Online, however it's called. It's a massive multiplayer online game. It's a first-person shooter, but it has sort of a persistent map. It's like a 1/4 scale map of part of Western Europe that includes like Belgium and northern France, and it's one big map. You can run from coast to coast. You can fly fighter planes across it. And it has sort of that element of, units have a certain number of men. They get replacements. If you lose more than a certain number of men a certain period of time, you may not be able to replace it. Equipment, you only have a certain number within a unit of certain types of equipment. As the war goes on, or as the campaign goes on, your equipment gets more advanced and older. And there certainly is, there's different units, and I don't know exactly how senior command works because I've, never been anything except a grunt when I've played that. But there are commanders of units, and they order things around the map, and you're playing another human team, and your goal is to basically conquer the map. And the campaigns last, weeks. I don't think they last months, but they last, quite a while, and it's persistent, so it's always playing. I don't think the game ever really caught a huge following, but I know there were times where, you had thousands of people all playing it. Several big battles could be going on at one point in time across this map. So really sort of neat, really kind of meshed the strategy and sort of war and first-person shooter into like a real-time campaign game, but I don't think it was ever tremendously financially successful. It's still around, though, so I just don't think they have the player base they used to. It's still just kind of barely hanging on.
I can imagine the graphics are probably not that great, 2002, 2003.
They did a few major engine upgrades, so, I mean, they're not Call of Duty, AAA studio graphics, but they're respectable for what it is.
Yeah.
I remember thinking
the
air campaign stuff was really interesting when you're flying literally above other people who are fighting on the ground, and there were strategic bombing raids. You could hit like supply depots that would influence like the supplies of units. So you might or you could hit maybe some guys are in tanks and they're moving toward the front, because when you spawn, you don't spawn right at the front. You spawn wherever that unit theoretically should be. So, you could theoretically have interdiction raids by aircraft. There's some videos on YouTube that are pretty impressive for it. My biggest video of all time was actually when I played that like 4 years ago, when my channel was like brand new, 4 or 5 years ago. And I think it's up to like 170,000 views. It still draws pretty well. But it was, I was really into that game for a little while, and that was well after the peak of the game.
Wow!
But
gotta take a look at that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think Heroes and Generals is trying to do the same thing, but I haven't touched that, and maybe that's something I'll look at some point in time, because it certainly fits the historical aspect of what I look at. I don't know how strategic it is. Again, Battlefield or World War II Online certainly is to some extent, but not to any level I've ever really experienced.
What other games are you playing?
Like I said, I touched Cossacks 3. I actually just started getting into Stellaris. I did a live stream with a YouTuber called Kushin. He has his channel as Kushin's Gaming. I did that maybe 2 weeks ago, and that was a lot of fun. Just sort of a Sunday afternoon, kind of playing through. Actually, it was 3 weeks ago now, but it was just sort of a Sunday afternoon, casual game, and we just kind of streamed it, and it was a lot of fun. I've never really touched it before, but it was really easy to pick up and play. I've never really tried Stellaris. I'm not really big in the EU4, but I was impressed at how easy it was to figure things out. It took me like a half an hour, and then after that point, I didn't really feel like I was at any kind of handicap or loss or anything like that.
Yeah, the learning curve for that for Stellaris is crazy quick. I remember when I did the review or my first impressions, I literally picked it up in I got the whole gist of the way that game worked in like 5-10 minutes. I was like, geez, man. Now, versus other games that I've played, there's some games that it takes me like hours to kind of like figure out how these systems work. I think Paradox did an incredible job with that, because you have to put some really like a lot of research, a lot of good people behind like presenting the game engine, the UI, and everything critically, so that the user can pick it up very easily. And I always say that if you have to play a tutorial to figure out how a gaming system works, or how a production system works, or any of that stuff, then you're not doing it right. Like the trick with and I always attribute this like to the original iPhone. Reason, you have layman's, people like regular people on the street picking up smartphones is because they literally picked it up, tapped the phone, and typed in a phone number, and boom, they were able to pick it up within minutes and use it. And I feel that's the same way it should be with games.
I think it depends on the game. I mean, so a game like Stellaris that's trying to appeal to more of a mass market, yeah, that's probably true. And I definitely felt that was the case with Stellaris. But what I will say is that a game like War in the Pacific is so huge. And sure, the UI could be improved and made better. But if you're talking about a game that covers World War II at a scale of, infantry units down to battalions in some cases, every single air unit of like a squadron or bigger, like it's not realistic to say, unless you're a flat-out genius, which, maybe there's someone out there who will develop a game like that perfectly. But I don't think it's realistic if you're trying to appeal to, like, the ultra-hardcore grognard and say, listen, you're not going to have to look at any instructions, any tutorials, you'll just be able to figure it out. I think there's a fine balance, and I think a lot of it is who your target audience is. If your target audience is Joe Schmo, then sure, it needs to be an easy game that's easy to pick up and play. If your target audience is Grognard Central and you want to, cover everything down to the last, cartridge in your supply convoy that's being transported across the Pacific in 50 ships, with destroyer escorts, navigating submarines and air, those types of games, I just don't think it's terribly realistic to say, pick up and play and learn just like that. I kind of disagree with you there, if only I don't think it's a universal standpoint. That may be an ideal that you shoot for, but I think there are some games that are beyond being able to have that done at this point in time.
I mean, the way I look at it is, it really comes down to me is the UI design. Like, for example, like you were saying, like let's say you're playing a War in the Pacific or a really complex game like that. And you're moving infantry soldiers to Guadalcanal. And, instead of pressing like 5 or 10 buttons, clicking this, clicking that, moving this, moving the map, clicking that, to make something, a system that works where you could just click the unit, tap the area where you want them to send, and then, to limit the amount of clicks. The thing that drives me nuts is like to move a unit from point A to point B. If that involves me clicking like 5 to 10 times and going through 5 or 10 different menus, there's a problem. Like I think, I'm fine with going down to like, intricate things like, moving the supplies and all this such. But I think it needs to be handled to the point where, it's not a click fest. You're like, all right, I just spent 10 minutes reassigning my supplies for this one unit. Now I have another 50 units I got to do that to. Well, you literally spent 3 hours moving supplies to the units. You really didn't even play the game. You just, diverted supplies, So, I mean, I think there's a way. I think what it comes down to is UI design. If you design the UI a proper way, people can get the systems, the way the game runs and properly, very easily. I mean, it would improve the game and also increase the audience, I remember when I played War in the Pacific, it was a game that I required some time to put into, but I eventually got the hang of it. But I honestly thought that no, I still think that's a really great game. I wasn't too overwhelmed. There's certain games that still overwhelm me today.
I think War in the Pacific doesn't overwhelm, at least me. It doesn't overwhelm me in the short term. Like turn to turn, sure, that's fine. But where it gets very difficult to manage is when you're talking, okay, resource flow and other things that aren't clearly communicated easily, up front. Things like logistics get very complicated very quickly. Now, I think it's a great game. I enjoy the hell out of it. But that piece to it, the way resources and logistics are managed is something that makes that game not what you're talking about. It prevents that game from being able to be designed in a way where you've got a real sleek and simple user interface. You could probably figure things out to make it work for, giving movement orders or combat orders or things like that. But when it comes to tracking, okay, I'm playing as Japan, I need to get, 500,000 units of oil out of the Dutch East Indies and get them transported to Japan. And, I need to do that once a month. And then trying to manage, like, okay, what's my actual flow? What am I putting on ships? What's actually making it to Japan? How much are my ships consuming on their way to Japan? What's the net that's showing up in Japan? I think that's where it gets really complicated when you have to do that, but then you also have to have this core combat mechanic. I think that's where it gets a little bit too much for what you're talking about. I agree it's an ideal state to shoot for, but what I think the challenge is communicating vital information to the player that maybe varies depending on the country you're playing or the style that you're playing. I think a game that does a really good job of it, in my opinion, is a game called Command Modern Air Naval Operations, which is a newer game which focuses on sort of modern or post-World War II conflicts and is very much a spiritual successor to Harpoon. And the game has a ton going on, and I'm not good at it, so maybe I shouldn't be saying this because I can't come out and say, like, yeah, I'm great at the game and it does this really well. But what I feel like it does well is it's really approachable in the sense that if I want to move a unit, I click on it, and I think I right-click somewhere. I need to have it up. I'm actually playing, but it's intuitive enough for me to move a unit within 2 button clicks, maybe 3 depending on what I'm trying to do. Like if I want to change the altitude my plane's flying at and also move it and change, stance orders from, not combat to engage an enemy target, then some more clicks get involved. But from a really basic standpoint, I can right-click at a point on a map, it'll go there, I can left-click on a unit, I can, and then I can, within 2 clicks, I can get a unit moving to where I want. So it may not be as pretty or streamlined as what you're thinking, but I think it does a really good job of, at least from a grognard wargame level, doing that. What it struggles at is communicating why things are happening to you as the player. The information is all there, but that's when you have to dig into the game and kind of figure out its detailed mechanics to figure out why are certain things happening. It does a pretty good job. I mean, certainly by wargame levels, it does a great job of communicating that information. But I think it certainly does a better job than War in the Pacific does. And if there was a modern game that I was going to say, that has a pretty sleek interface for a ultra-detailed war game, I would probably say it's Command Modern Air Naval Operations.
I'm on the website right now. It's by Matrix, right?
It's published by Matrix and Slither, and it's made by a company called Warfare Sims, which is actually really cool because they signed some contract with BAE, which is basically like, I don't know if Boeing is the right comparison. Maybe Lockheed Martin is a better comparison of like England. So they signed a deal with them where they built or modified their simulation into a professional version designed for military use. And I guess the developers of the game and also the heads of Slytherin were recently at the Pentagon in Washington talking to senior U.S. military officials about the game. Because I think it's important to know, like, these kind of simulations can be really useful, especially these sort of operational. It's an operational real-time simulation, so it doesn't have all the flashy graphics of something like Wargame Airland Battle, but what it has is really detailed, under the hood mechanics to very accurately, or to my ignoramus eye, seemingly really accurately, simulate a modern day engagement. So if they're trying to figure out, let's do some computer simulations of, anti-ballistic missile defense, like a game like this, if you've got all the detailed classified information encompassed into it, which is what would probably, I assume, be in a professional version, not something for civilian consumption, then you can use these mechanics to simulate a lot of the kind of stuff that they probably want to know, and who knows? Maybe it's as good or better in some circumstances as the simulations that the government has today. I think part of the problem that a lot of and again, I'm not an insider on military simulations from a government perspective, but from my own standpoint within a company that, we commission certain projects to address certain needs, and obviously the government does that as well. One thing that you often fall into is creating programs or products designed to meet a specific need or a specific program. And something like this gives you a little bit more flexibility in trying to say, hey, I want to be able to simulate a wide range of options, and gives the government the option of, frankly, of it being at a fraction of the cost of what developing something new would be. I think a lot of times you'll see like an anti-ballistic missile test. Maybe they have their own proprietary software that's designed specifically to simulate this one event. Well, if its entire focus is on ABM defense, then it may not be an accurate real-world simulator of what's going to happen. You're kind of... It's like teaching to the test almost as far as creating a program is concerned, rather than accurately learning everything involved in the topic and then being able to do well on the test. I may have rambled a bit there, and I hope that made sense, but that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going through some of the screenshots here of the game. I've been curious, what's the learning curve on it, and how long did it take you to pick it up?
Well, that's where I mean, so in order to pick up and just start playing and fiddling around, it's really easy. And it's almost like it mixes scenarios with sandbox. So one of the really neat things is, like, if I go into the game, I can play around in a in a scenario, and if I want, I can kind of take over as like God and just plop new units into the map while I'm playing.
You can, really? Nice.
Well, I mean, it's kind of, you're not really playing the scenario at that point, but you have sort of that ability if you want to strip yourself out of saying, like, I'm not really playing the scenario anymore. I want to, maybe I create a scenario and just play through it as I'm creating a scenario. I watched a few, way back when the game first came out, I watched a few live streams by Belugan, who actually was a big fan of the game and ended up getting a job with Warfare Sims on the side of his main, day job, because, he's a coder and a programmer and things like that. But one thing that he would commonly do is he was playing through scenarios, and I think these are more custom scenarios, and I've done it on my own custom scenarios. I haven't really tried it. Actually, yeah, I have done it in a few. I did it in Red Hand. You can import units into a scenario that may not already be there, and, it's not uncommon for me to import nuclear, missiles or ICBMs and launch a nuclear strike on an enemy when I can't beat them otherwise. But it's kind of a nice little fun thing to do. It's like a sandbox within an ultimate military simulator. It's really interesting.
So does this game? I was looking through some of the conflicts. Looks like they're all like 70s, 80s, and 90s. Is Command Live kind of like a spin-off from that? Because there looks like there's couple new releases that they just came out with. Command Live, Spratly Spat.
I need like a sound effect so we can just have like a zinger for being like, what a segue into what we wanted to talk about today. But I don't have that right now. So, so yes, it does have modern scenarios first of all. So there is some stuff. Red Hand is like a early 2000s hypothetical Russian-Armenian conflict. But what you're talking about is Command Live, which is, first of all, to answer your original question, the game really covers 1946 to present day. And they have a database with thousands of units in it that they continually update. So it is something that it's almost like Jane's. It's like a video. Like, imagine you had this Jane's book with all these units and all this equipment, and you decided, I want to be able to see what would happen if this one weapon platform went up against this weapon platform that I'm reading about. You can do that. Because it has,
like, inspired by Jane's, basically. I remember there was a Jane's game back in the 90s, I believe. I picked that up.
I would say, no, I mean, it's really a direct successor to Harpoon, which is a similar game which actually inspired the book Red Storm Rising way back in the day about Tom Clancy and Larry Bond, I believe it was. But so it's really a direct successor to that. But it's this idea of a military sim sandbox with literally whatever's in the world today, put this into a game and, create it. And from a visual standpoint, it's very bare bones, but that gives incredible flexibility. But to answer where you're going with Command Live, so there's this, the game allows you to create whatever you want from 46 to present day. And it has this vast database of units and equipment and things like that. But I think where they're going with Command Live, so what was it, like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago? My memory is horrible right now, but I don't know if you remember when Russia invaded Crimea in the Ukraine and later Eastern Ukraine, and that conflict kicked off. Belugan, who I mentioned before, Belugan, he is was a big fan of the game, did a lot of live streaming when the game came out, kind of teaching people, a lot of tutorials, some really great material on his YouTube channel. I think it's like Belugan Campaign, youtube.belugan campaign or something like that. You can go to belugancampaign.com if you want to figure more out. But he did some great, videos and live streaming stuff on YouTube. And when the conflict in Ukraine started, and I don't want to monopolize the conversation, I know I've been talking for a bit, but when the conflict in Ukraine started, Belugan created his own hypothetical scenario in Ukraine he wanted to replicate what was going on. While we were seeing it on TV, he wanted to replicate it and kind of show, like, almost like you could use it as like an educational tool to like say, these are the battle lines, this is what's going on, these are the units involved, and just kind of see, test some things out. And he did this. He had like a whole web page on his website that was dedicated to it. It was like Ukraine 2014 or something like that. And I think Command Live, he wasn't on the Warfare Sims team at the time, but I think Command Live was almost like, hey, that was really cool. That was really neat. There were a lot of people that were really engaged with this. It was an interesting idea. Let's war game the war as it's going on. And I think that's where they were kind of coming from with Command Live. The idea was they're going to create some, developer-created scenarios. So these aren't user-created scenarios. They're developer-created scenarios. They're going to provide things like news articles and little videos and things like to kind of create an atmosphere of, a modern conflict occurring. And they would release these scenarios periodically. So the first one they released was based on a hypothetical Turkish-Russian, conflict. Then they had something that was based off Brexit, so the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, and then a hypothetical conflict breaking out around that. And then the most recent one, the Spratly, whatever it's called, is a hypothetical conflict over the Spratly Islands. So these are all modern-day, current, flashpoints that something could happen, and they are based around historical events that are occurring. But they're a little bit different than Ukraine was, where Ukraine was, Belugan was saying, I'm simulating this conflict as it's occurring, and everything they've done so far with Command Live has kind of been more on the hypothetical nature. As opposed to like an actual scenario based on a conflict that's currently occurring, although users certainly make that. But I thought it was interesting because the way they marketed it and the way they pushed it was really like, fight the war as it occurs now, like real world conflicts brought to life. But that hasn't really been the case. But it kind of serves as the topic for this podcast now that we're 30 minutes in. It makes me think, what do we think? So what do you think, I guess, Jean, if we're talking about like a game like this? So they're going to say you can fight real world battles as they're occurring today. Let's say they came out with a new scenario and it was about oh goodness, I'm trying to think of something that's occurring. Obviously there's a ton of stuff happening with ISIS. Let's say, God forbid, Russia made a big thrust in Ukraine and was driving west toward Kiev. And in the midst of that fighting, and obviously this hasn't happened, but in the midst of that happening, they came out and they said, fight Ukraine as it's occurring. Fight this particular battle as it's occurring. What do you think about that? Like, it's cool.
With something like that, I was in the military, and I could tell you if I wouldn't support something like that. I wouldn't be on board with a game like that. And the reason why I wouldn't be on board is because, like, for example, let's say they made I'll use Iraq as a good example because I remember there was controversy about a game like that a couple years ago. 69th Infantry, which was a unit that was by my house, and I augmented that unit a few times. They got deployed to Iraq, and they lost. They were a National Guard unit. They lost I think it was like 12 or 18 soldiers, and then times 2 or times 3 wounded. And if they've made a game, with that unit inside there and say, all right, well, the 69th Infantry is patrolling this area, and saying, see if you could do a better job than them. I honestly, I know one of my sergeants who was in that unit. He would be like livid, if anything like that came out, because I think it's too fresh. There's still so much emotion about recent conflicts. So if they made a game around Ukraine or Kiev, I can imagine people that are involved in that conflict, hearing about, oh, what if you were able to hold this city longer? The people that were involved holding that city would be, it would be like a spit in their face in a way. The conflict, there's too much emotion. There's too much stuff going on within that fight, within that battle, within that within that conflict. I don't think they should touch it. There's a certain, I think, wait period before we touch on conflicts. And I think it's usually a couple of generations out. So right now, I think, Vietnam, making Vietnam conflicts. I remember I used to play squad battles, Vietnam. I forgot who made that. John Tiller, I believe, made that game. And I remember when it came out, and I was playing it when I think I was a teenager at the time, and I was playing it, and I felt okay with it. I felt like I wasn't crossing a line. I didn't feel like that this was wrong. But I'll be honest, if I was playing a game where, it was like a squad battles and it involved the 16th Infantry and them in Baghdad, I know people, I worked with some people in those units. I would be kind of pissed. I would be a little bit like, this is not right. This is wrong. This is something that should not be out there to play as a game, because for some people, it's still fresh in their minds.
Okay. What about, do you think it has more to do with the fact that it's personalizing it, though? So you mentioned like a specific unit and, a game that's touching a specific conflict. So let's say there was a scenario, or, let's remove it from command, because they're not really doing this. It's kind of the marketing pitch, but they're not really actually doing this. So I don't know if it's fair to focus only on them. But what if it was not talking about a specific unit? So it's not talking about the 283rd Military Police Brigade that just got ambushed and you're fighting that battle. It's talking about a conflict in general. So what I'm thinking about is there's a game that came out in 2012, believe it or not, because the Syrian civil war has been going on a lot longer than I think a lot of us really kind of internalize. But in 2012, there was a game that came out that was called Endgame Syria, and it was almost like a card game, but it's a game made by a company called Games for Change, and it was focusing on the Syrian civil war. And it gave you, certain actions you could take. It was a mobile game, and, it allowed you to fight conflicts, to draw cards, to negotiate for peace, to, commit atrocities, things like that. And I guess there's no specific units mentioned, though. So it's like infantry, Palestinians, a technical unit with like guys in the back of a Jeep. And it's sort of a card game drawing thing, and it does keep track of casualties, so it's talking about the number of civilians killed and, the length of the conflict and that kind of stuff. But it's kind of abstracted. So like there's a tab that comes up, major civilian loss. Recent fighting has resulted in a tragic incident with a large loss of civilian life. Both sides have been blamed and lost some of their support. Civilian tragedy caused both sides political support. So what about a game like that? Like, they're obviously pushing some sort of political agenda, or if even, making you aware of it. And it's certainly, this was created while the war was fresh and just starting. What about something like that, where it's not, hey, it's the 30th Battalion of whatever?
I would still probably. I think I still wouldn't be on board about it. I think because it's an actual still conflict that's going on. Like, for example, if they made a, like going back to that squad battles. Let's say they didn't use the 6th Infantry and they used artificial units, and it's still involving a war that men are still dying. I think Matrix and Slytherin with these games that you were mentioning did it right. They did a hypothetical, I forgot what game we were
Command Modern Air Naval Operations.
Yeah, where they were. It was not direct. That game was not based on the direct conflict. It was a hypothetical conflict similar to what's going on. I think that's like treading the line. I think that's like like okay. I mean, I think that's okay because it's fictional, but it replicates some of what's going on now. I know that whether it's done intentionally or not, I think that's something that would be, I think, okay with. When you're saying, all right, well, this is what happened. This is about based on when you're directly saying, look, this is a game about the Iraq War. U.S. invaded. These are the causes. You know, go at it. And choose ISIS or choose U.S. I don't know. I mean, if you're using like fictional, like if they instead of the Iraq War, they said, all right, there's a conflict in Iraq where Iran attacked Iraq and U.S. is supporting Iraq to defend it against Iran. And you kind of change it around a little bit and make it like a fictional scenario where it's things are different. I think that's treading line. I think that would be okay for me at least to play. But I don't know. It's something that says, look, this is based on the Iraq War. U.S. is invading for this. Go play the game and see how you can do it. I don't know. I think honestly, it's something I wouldn't be comfortable, I don't think, with.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I mostly agree with you in the sense of like if it's saying this unit fought this battle, see if you can do better, and it literally happened like last week. I agree. There, I mean, sure, people can do what they want, and you don't have to buy it if you don't if you're offended by it. But on the flip side, I still think it's distasteful, to say the least. If you're talking about specific units, what I guess I wonder is though, what's the cooldown period, for lack of a better phrase for that? Because there's a new game that's coming out, and certainly there are scenarios that deal with Iraq and Afghanistan in Command. I think I'm trying to remember back. But not while those engagements were actually occurring. And then there's a new game coming out by Matrix and Slytherin soon called Afghanistan 11, I think it is, which focuses on the conflict in Afghanistan in 2011. I mean, that was only 5 years ago. I think it's coming out this year. They haven't announced the date yet, to my knowledge. But what about something like that? So I mean, there's certainly a bit of a gap there. It's been 5 years. But we haven't been out of Afghanistan for 5 years. There's certainly people still fighting and dying there.
Is it based on the exact conflict, or is it like a hypothetical, like we're going in to fight the Russians or something like that?
No, I mean, it's the actual Afghan, U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. I don't know if it references specific units or engagements or anything like that. So, did you play Vietnam 65?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so this is
by John Tiller, right?
No, that was made. It's much more, easily approachable. I think there's a tablet version of it as well.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking. I did play it not long. I think for like an hour or so. I know which game you're talking about.
Yeah, so this is basically it's a newer version of that, but focusing on the Afghanistan conflict in 2011. So it's it's not like it's saying these are specific guys or specific units. It's like this is a tank unit and this is an infantry unit. That's my understanding of it. But I wonder, is there, and obviously it's subjective. So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there listening to this who are like, this is stupid. I think it's fine. I think it's easier to say there's an issue if it's this unit fighting this battle, try and do better than these people who died. Like that's I think if you don't think that would be a little distasteful, then that would be, especially if you're doing it like a week after it occurs, then I think you're being a little bit dishonest. Not you, just the vague user. But what's the line there? Where do you say something is acceptable to play a game about? Because everyone says World War II's fine. Like you can go out and play World War II. You can fight Omaha Beach. You can have specific units. You can even talk about specific people, and that's all fine. But how do you decide? What's the right thing for a developer to do?
I think for me, I think time, it sounds corny a little bit, but time heals all, I think. And there is no exact like day that, that it happens. It just kind of melds away, like right now, like when we play Vietnam games, it's, we don't have a lot. Well, most of us don't thing that's wrong. They're like, well, you have this unit, they're engaging the Viet Cong, see if you could do better. I think Vietnam's so far away that people are like, yeah, I mean, this is okay. I think Gulf War is at that point where I actually was in class with a Gulf War veteran, and we were talking shop about the military, and he was talking about his unit's offensive into Gulf War. I think we're at the point where that's kind of getting to the point where it'll be okay to develop strategy war games involving actual units in the Gulf War around this time period, like 2016 now. That's how many years? That's almost like, it's 20, 30 years since that conflict. I think it's going to require for Iraq or Afghanistan at least probably 20 to 30 years, where time kind of like heals a lot of that pain that is developed from those conflicts, especially. I mean, you have you have units over there that are still fighting to this day, and you make a unit, you make a game about Afghanistan's campaigns or battles in 2011. I know you're not using the actual units, but people that served in 2011, in Afghanistan are going to be like, oh, that's kind of fucked up. They're gonna be like, this is wrong. Like, I served in Afghanistan during this year. I lost guys. You shouldn't make games about this. This is not a game. This is actually war. And it means a lot to them, and time hasn't healed their pain. And I think out of respect for that, we shouldn't be doing that, because they did a lot for us going over there and fighting for the units that got deployed down there, which is pretty much everybody got deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. So I think there's a certain amount of time that we have to wait before we do stuff like that.
Okay. I think I have a slightly different take on it, if only because I think it does matter if it's abstracted out. So I think there's a useful, if you're talking about hypothetical conflict or real conflict that's occurring, and we're trying to raise awareness around what's going on and make people aware of this event that is occurring, and people aren't paying attention to it. I think that's different. In my take, I think motivations matter. If it's just see if you can do better than people who are dying, I think that's easy to say. Okay, that's definitely messed up. But I think if it's something where you're trying to say, hey, listen, you should be aware that this is going on, and this is a way that we can teach you what's going on through the form of a game, because a lot of people, especially younger kids these days, learn very effectively through interactive experiences, and I think if that's the way it's communicated, I think it can be done more tastefully. There was a really interesting game, and it wasn't current, but there was a really interesting game I stumbled across. It was a education game specifically made for schools, called Escalation, and it was about Vietnam, and it puts you in the shoes of President Johnson. And this occurred certainly well after the fact, and it's 30, 40 years. The game was made in, I think, the 90s, early 2000s, but it put you in the role of Johnson, of trying to make decisions about sending troops or launching bombing campaigns or doing whatever he had to make decisions about doing. And I think if it's put in that context, I think if it's put in the context of, and this is my 2 cents, you're certainly welcome to your own opinion, but I think if it's put in the context of, these are complicated situations. Here's what's going on. We're trying to teach you about it so that you can understand and participate in society and have an understanding of what's going on and what issues are at stake, and maybe challenge you to think about what's going on. I think that can be really useful. But I think, again, a lot of it depends on the motivations behind the way you're developing it, and a lot of it depends on how you're messaging it. If you're messaging it as, go to war today and see what it's really like, I think you lose a lot of that argument. But if you're messaging in a way of, we're trying to teach you about this conflict that's going on. I wish I could remember the name of the game, but there was a Palestinian conflict game which put you in the role of a journalist. So it's not a war game per se, but it put you in the role of like a journalist in the West Bank. And this came out, several years ago when there were a lot of bombings going on in Israel, and it kind of made me think, like, I don't know how I feel about this. You're profiting off of other people's tragedy, but at the same time, you could be using it as a way to try and make people aware of it, because it was happening. But how many people in the U.S. are paying attention? How many people were informed about the issues going on? I think the risk there is then you certainly open yourself up to pushing one political agenda over another. So I think you got to be careful on how you do that. But I do think there is a use to using games as education tools, and in the case of a modern conflict, I think it can be used that way as well. So long as it's tactful and you're not being disrespectful to those that are suffering.
It's definitely like games like that definitely tread the line, and I always defer down to the veterans. Like I would like something like that. I would always be like go up to guys that are in that unit, like, hey, how do you guys feel about a game like this for educational purposes? I think they should do like a study on stuff like that, and maybe write an article or something like that to. I wonder if anybody has done that. If I could read an article about it, discussing games revolving around Afghanistan, Iraq for educational purposes, how the veterans would feel about that.
Yeah, and I don't know to Iraq and Afghanistan's point. I don't know if anyone's really done that yet. I think from a war game or a strategy game perspective, we just want to play a good game, right? Like, I mean. These things aside, we want to play a good, engaging game that we can move units around and kind of fight a battle or a war. I think that's where it gets very delicate in how you position it. If it's specific units with specific people involved, and this occurred a year ago or a week ago or something like that, then you're getting really dicey. I think, like you said, time heals all wounds. It's 5 years ago. It's still pretty recent, but I think that might be starting to get into the range of, we recognize not everyone's going to agree with it, but it's not like we're directly profiting off, the news that's coming out today of people struggling if it is 5-10 years ago. So I think it's a question of, are you really profiting off other people's sufferings, and are you, what's the intent behind this? And the way that the game goes across it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, and especially gaming is transforming a lot lately. Especially with VR coming around, and I'm sure they're probably going to be touching up on subjects. Wasn't there a game that they tried to do like a first person shooter about Iraq? I remember something like that.
Well, there was one that never launched because people got basically were really upset about it. It was about Fallujah, I think, but I don't know if it was really accurate or if it was just like a shoot 'em up bloodbath type game. That never ended up launching. It was made 2-3 years after the major fighting in Fallujah. At least, the original couple of battles of Fallujah, I know fighting there's continued to occur, but in terms of the battles of Fallujah where, I think the U.S. sent a full division or something like that. I think there were Marines. But yeah, that was something that was developed and never released. Yeah, I think, and VR is going to be another really tricky thing, because you could easily say this is a way you can inform people about what it's really like and what's going on over there and why we should care about things that we're not paying attention to. On the flip side, then it really starts to reek of war profiteering if it's like, hey, see what it's like to be a Marine in Helmand province, Afghanistan, as this fight's going on. I think it opens up to a lot of sort of ethical and moral questions. I don't have the answer, which maybe makes me a crappy podcaster. I can't say here's exactly what I think. I think it's a balancing act, and I think it's tricky. But I do agree that I think there should be some time that passes, unless again I still think there's some cause there or some case there for education, where you can say this is something that has a clear value to society. And sure, some people are going to be upset about it, but this is important, and we need to be talking about it.
Kind of reminds me of this using this for educational purposes. Kind of reminds me of 1861, 1862, when they started using photography to kind of show the experiences of hey, this is what goes on in war. And it kind of transformed the public to seeing, you know, to visualizing the war, saying, "Hey, this is the dead of Antietam, and this is the dead of Gettysburg," and it kind of like forced the people to say, "Look, this war," forcing their politicians to say, "Look, we need to wrap this war up. This is too grisly. This is too bad. And look at these dead soldiers out in this field." And I think you're right. If maybe if they could find an educational, a new educational medium to utilize something like that. Perhaps maybe it can stop future wars from happening, or end conflicts a lot quicker, and that would be really good.
Yeah, I don't. You could also argue it could be used for for purposes of educating why we're fighting and why we should be fighting, depending on what you're showing. But I think the interesting thing to your point is, you saw that in the Civil War to some extent. I don't think it made the war any less bloody or any quicker, but it may have allowed people to, for the first time, feel a little bit of, war is certainly not all glory. I think you saw that even more so in World War II to some extent. Vietnam certainly was, a televised war, and, even more so in Iraq and Afghanistan, when people were paying attention at least to those conflicts, there was a ton of footage coming out, although it was certainly more sanitized than I think what we probably saw in Vietnam. The military learned some lessons there where they didn't quite give the same level of access, perhaps. But I think the interesting thing is, and I think this applies to game development too, outside of even these questions, I think people, to me, more and more want to be involved. They want to be a piece of the puzzle. And I think you're starting to see that in games. That's certainly true in the RPG genre. I think it's one thing that people have really found interesting and exciting about the Scourge of Wargames is this idea, and certainly true of Falcon 4.0, this idea of being a cog in a much larger machine. Like, people want to experience what's going on. It's a way to teach, it's a way to educate, it's a way to experience and play through an event. And I think you're starting to see this with social media, and I think with VR, to your point, I think as VR becomes more and more ubiquitous, you might start seeing news reporting that, like, feel like you're at this riot or at this protest. And I don't know if it's a good thing. Like, I don't know, because I think the natural extension of that then becomes warfare, see what it's like on the front lines, a GoPro of a U.S. military soldier as he's running across the lines. But now it's not a GoPro, it's, in your VR headset, and it feels like you're running through, this conflict as it's occurring. And you're following this guy in a real war. Like, I worry that we, almost dehumanize war to some extent. I think technology has traditionally been used to humanize war and make people understand what's going on. But I almost wonder if you could take it too far, and I wouldn't be surprised to, I feel like games are almost a new communication medium, or could become that as VR becomes more and more ubiquitous. Maybe I'm worrying about nothing, and I'm certainly striving past the initial idea of this discussion, but I think it's something that's interesting to consider and think about. I don't have the answers, but I think it's something that we should be conscious of.
I agree with you, because I could see the military utilizing VR or maybe even AR. Do you remember back like 10 years ago when the Iraq War was starting? I think it was like 2004, 2005, or maybe 2003, one of those years.
2003.
They came. I remember it started 2003. But the game, I think it was called America's Army. I forgot what year it came out.
Oh yeah, where they were, but they didn't see. That was another one of those where they kind of changed the scenario. So I don't think, and I could be wrong, I don't think they had you actually fighting in Iraq. So America's Army, for those of you who aren't aware, was first-person shooter that the military actually put out, almost like a recruiting tool. It was like, be a soldier. That was the context, right?
Yeah. It was exactly like that. It was like, you play as a private, or you rank up, and it was kind of like a Battlefield, but sanctioned by the U.S. military to kind of give you like, hey, this is what a soldier does. This is how cool it is, and wouldn't you want to join the army?
Yeah, right. I think it's still around too, to some extent, but
really?
I don't remember, and I could be wrong, but I don't remember them throwing you to actual, like, it wasn't Iraq. It was multiplayer versus other humans, and everyone was, when you were playing, you were always the Americans, but like to the opponents, the other team looks like, looks like Middle Eastern enemy soldiers, but it was all kind of abstract. I don't think it was like, this is a refinery in Iraq, or this is a cave in Afghanistan. I think it was all left kind of to your imagination to figure it out. But
Yeah, you're right. I remember the other, like you looked at the other team, they were not American, but then the other team also saw you as not American. I believe it was something like that.
yeah, it was kind of interesting. It's like you're always blue and they're always red, but yeah, it's just bizarre. I think it was well done, from that standpoint, from a development and gameplay standpoint. But I think it's, to your point, I wonder if we're going to see more of those kind of things, especially as VR becomes more and more ubiquitous.
But yeah, and VR is kind of like shooting up recently. I mean, you have like Google coming out with their Google HTC. There's another company that's making, I think OnePlus. I think it's OnePlus. I forgot the name of the company, but they're giving you like a free VR set when you get their phone.
Google did something like that with Google Cardboard for a while too, with like Android phones.
Yeah, and then they're coming out with a new version of it. I forgot what it's called. It's only on select Android phones, and it's supposed to. I forgot, it's called Daydream or something like that. I forgot what it was, but I feel like. How do you feel like? Do you think this is gonna be like the next generation of? Can you see strategy games being applied to this?
I don't know. Maybe. I think something like Scourge of War would be really interesting. It's like now you're in the saddle of a general and you've got to give orders,
Ooh.
and something like that could be really interesting.
That would be cool.
There was kind of there's a setting in it you can lock yourself to the saddle, so it's kind of like you see what you would if you were in the saddle. But if you could VR that would be really cool. Yeah, I think it depends on the game. War in the Pacific, it's like, okay, you're Nimitz, you're in an office, pushing icons around a map. Well, I don't know how useful that's going to be, or Hearts of Iron. But like for a flight simulator, that could be awesome. For a real-time strategy game where you are playing as like a general, almost in like an RPG standpoint, like with Scourge of War, I think that could be cool. Obviously first-person shooters, there's a piece there, but traditional strategy games, again, I think RTSs probably give you the best hope if it's something where it's trying to say you are a specific character or person within the scheme of this battle you're fighting. Outside of that, I don't know how well it fits.
The one thing that really got my interest is something Microsoft's developing is Microsoft HoloLens, and it's an AR kind of component. So it's like glasses you put over your head, and they had a demo of it. You can probably catch it on YouTube, where they had it on and they were playing like Minecraft. And what was really interesting is the person that had the HoloLens was kind of like alternating the world. It was almost like a virtual board game in essence, but Minecraft wise. And he was manipulating, I believe, the terrain and stuff like that. What I think would be really cool is if they made like with the HoloLens, if this actually becomes a consumer item and becomes more commonplace, developing like board games, strategy maps where you can actually physically move units with your finger. Like you're standing there with the glasses and you're at your dining room table or something like that. And there's nothing on the table, but with your HoloLens, you're seeing like the environment. You're moving tanks with your finger, and you're giving them orders and stuff like that. I think something like that would be really cool. I would spend a couple $100 or even maybe $1,000 on a product like that, where I can physically manipulate units with my hands.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I don't know if I have much of an opinion. I haven't thought of it that much, but. Yeah, it's certainly something to keep an eye out on. Circling back, though, I would say that from the gaming, real wars as they occur, it sounds like you've got a little bit of a more restrictive view on it, obviously within certain confines, but being sensitive to the veterans, which I think is important. I think I'm a little bit more open to it, but again, to me, I'd like to see how it's being used. I'd like to see the context behind it, and the intent and the marketing all matter to me. So I think it's, in my standpoint, is it's more of a case by case. I think the closer you get to the conflict, the more stringent you have to be on what you would say is, and again, anyone can do what they want to do. It's just a matter of whether it's socially acceptable, if you will, or at least acceptable in my eyes, or whether you're starting to kind of cross some ethical boundaries, or at least being somewhat shady. But it sounds like we both kind of agree it's something you gotta be cautious of, and the idea of fighting a battle as it's occurring is a little bit distasteful.
Yeah, especially when you get to like individual units, that would be.
Yeah. No, I agree with you there 100%. As far as that's concerned, though, I mean, we're a little bit over an hour, so I think we'll start looking at wrapping this up. Given that this is the Single Malt Strategy podcast, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you what you've been drinking. Now, I already know the answer, so I know you're not drinking anything right now.
No.
Have you been drinking anything lately?
I did. I think a couple of days ago, I had like a day break between fire department and school. It was like maybe like 5-6 days ago, and actually, it was not a good idea. I remember at school in the morning. I got off from school from that day, and I remember I got my buddy gave me for my birthday was what's that southern thing that people make? Damn it, I have
moonshine.
Yeah, he gave me homemade moonshine. And I tried it. I had a couple of beers beforehand. I had like a 6-pack, and he decided like, let me try this moonshine, and it was definitely good. It had a weird oaky taste. He put like a flavor in it, and I really didn't.
So he made this like this wasn't like supermarket like we're calling it moonshine, but it's not really. This was like legitimate moonshine that this guy made.
Yeah, and he was just like, "Here, happy birthday." I was like, "What is this?" Like moonshine. And I was like, "From the store." I was like, "No, it's my own personal." But I'm like, "Oh, all right."
You're lucky you didn't go blind.
Yeah, I know. I was just I figure after 4 beers, I had some liquid courage on me. So
they say beer before liquor, never been sicker.
Yeah.
Liquor before beer. That's the way to go. Then you're in the clear. As far, well, it's good to know. So you've been drinking moonshine.
Yeah.
I've been drinking some Spotted Cow, which I don't think I talked about in our previous episode. It's a Wisconsin beer that's very popular in the state. You can only find it in the state of Wisconsin. It's a small brewery just south of Madison is kind of the geographic area. It's kind of a light, not a summer beer. It's certainly a full-bodied beer, but it's a little bit sweet. I think there's some corn in it. I could be wrong. Let's see. Yeast, hops, water, and malted barley. Okay, it certainly feels a little bit kind of sweeter and kind of easy to drink.
Hops in that?
What?
Is it natural to have hops in that?
Yeah, I mean all beer should have hops. It's not beer if it doesn't have hops.
Oh, I thought they only put hops in the IPAs.
No, they're just different levels. So like an IPA will be much hoppier. You'll taste the hops much more strongly. But I've been drinking that. What I really want to try, except I can't, is something brewed by a brewing company called Crying Eagle Brewery. They're based out of Lake Charles, Louisiana, but it's a very small outfit. They just started up. Had a friend who went to their opening ceremony, said it was a blast and that the beer was really good. They currently only brew 3 beers, but I think I heard something like they're only the 25th brewery ever to open in the state of Louisiana. There's not much of a craft brewery market down there. So it looks interesting. I wish I could try it, but I don't think they're widely available. I think it's really just like if you're in central southern Louisiana that you can find it. So hopefully there's someone listening to the podcast who is in that area and can buy me some and send me some. Feel free to email us at singlemaltstrategy@gmail.com. And I would be, I'd be happy to receive such a beer. But outside of that, I think I'll have to stick to kind of my Spotted Cow.
I think I've heard. I wonder if. I remember hearing one of my friends was saying that I think he said something about Spotted Cows. I remember
it's pretty well known, especially in the state. Like it's on tap in more bars than Miller Lite is, which given Miller's based out of Milwaukee, it's a pretty big deal for a company to do. They're also only available in Wisconsin, so there's sort of a cult following
Oh, they're only
around it.
available there because I remember running to. Well, one of my friends was telling me something about spotted cow. I was just like, I remember when he said that, I was like, spotted cow, and I remember I thought the name was kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, there was a bar in New
Um,
York that was shut down because they were selling it, but it's not licensed to
oh,
be sold outside the state. So they had like 100 crates, and it was like a Wisconsin alumni bar. Like, University of Wisconsin people, frequent that bar, and it ended up getting shut down and fined some
jeez.
ridiculous amount of money because they were illegally operating.
So they can't export that beer out of that
Their
state?
distributors only licensed to sell it in the state of Wisconsin, is my understanding.
Oh, that's damn it, that sucks. I
There's a lot of
remember I
people who
was.
trade beers back and forth. So there's like brewery groups not brewery, but like alcohol groups you can join where people like trade beer back and forth. I mean, that's fine. I don't know exactly the rules behind it, but it's like, you ship someone a 6-pack, they ship you a 6-pack, and then you can try different types of beers. It's interesting. I've never looked too much into it, but there are groups out there like that.
Is it legal though? I mean,
I think so. I mean, it's not like you're not selling it per se, so you're just trading it.
okay. I remember I was trying to get my hands on. I don't know if you ever. There was a thing. There's this. I remember I went to Vegas one time and they had this um, beer over there, and it was called, I think, Romulan Ale or something. I think it was after Star Trek, and it was really weird because you had a couple of beers, and then you go into the bathroom, and then Romulan Ale is blue, and it was dyed that certain color. So when you go into the bathroom and you start looking down, it's like, wait, that's not normal. So I wanted to get a 6-pack and just have my friends drink it and kind of freak out. But I remember going online and they were like, no, we don't export it out of Arizona or Nevada was, and I was like, shoot, man, that would have been awesome.
Yeah. Well, I guess you'll have to figure out another way to make your friends freak out.
Yeah, it would have been great to see their faces.
Yeah, right. But anyway, so I'd say we're at about time, about 70 minutes of podcast here. I hope the discussion was enjoyable for everybody listening in. I appreciate you all continuing to listen. I've been really happy. I know I was kind of sharing some numbers with you earlier, John, about the number of views. Our first episode's at over 1,300. Second episode a little bit less, around like 600. But what I was really kind of excited about were the iTunes numbers. With they're small, they're microscopic, and we're just starting out. But the first episode had something like 50 plus downloads in the first week on iTunes. The second video ended up having it like 90, of which like 70 happened in one day. So that was kind of exciting to see. I don't know how many people tune into YouTube per se to watch podcasts. We've done okay with the videos I posted on my channel, but I think the really interesting thing will be to see how it scales on iTunes, because certainly that's where most people get their podcast from. So I guess we'll see how that continues, and I certainly appreciate all the support from everybody continuing to watch, and please leave reviews on iTunes. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want to hear us talk about. I think, John, if I'm right, we talked about maybe having a guest on in the next podcast or two, and maybe kind of talking about some other YouTubers or gamers and kind of talking about their road to strategy gaming and wargaming.
Yeah, that would be. I remember we were talking about a couple of people, but that would be awesome because we can kind of expand on their views on where strategy gaming is going, and and their past and how they got into it. I always like listening to stories like that because kind of makes me reflect on my own.
Yeah, well, cool. Well, I think that's all I've got for tonight. I don't want to, drag it out too long, guys. I know we had some comments about our first one, which was like 2.5 hours. So I think that'll about do it for episode 3 of the Single Malt Strategy. I'm the historical gamer. You can call me Matt, and it was a pleasure chatting with you again today, Jean.
As one of the things I wanted to also ask you was, damn it, I forgot to mention this. Actually, I'll bring it up in the next episode. But it was great talking to you, and hopefully we'll do push out episode 4 maybe in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I think the idea is to kind of ideally post one every other week as best we can. That may slip a little bit, but in addition to that, just to make you aware now, I put in front of this video the little clip where you may have forgotten the name in the last episode before we introduced that podcast. I don't know if you remember that, but just to embarrass you a little bit there, that'll be in the front of this podcast.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks again for everybody tuning in. Until next time, I hope you all have a great week.
See you guys.